Good morning. This is still good morning. Nice to be here again. Again, Jeff Casberg. I'm a pharmacist with IPD Analytics. I'll take you through the first part of the show, the first half hour or so. Then Julie will come up and talk about the IRA. I'm going to be talking about biosimilars. I'm going to take you through some of the drugs launched, then some of the management, some savings, why we're not really seeing the erosion that you do with generics, a little bit on interchangeability, and then the pipeline. This slide displays 12 of the 14 products approved in the United States to date. A couple of the next slides will be the other two products not displayed here. What you notice when you look at this slide is they're all big name drugs. Lantus, Neulasta, Herceptin, Rituxan, household big name drugs, all multi-billion-dollar drugs. And how that compares to the generic world is, in the generic world, there's hundreds and hundreds of drugs, and every time a drug on the traditional side goes generic, it loses patents, no matter if it's a $5 million drug, a $10 million drug, or a $20 billion drug, there's always generics that are entered. So if it's a $20 million drug, pretty small, there's still 2 or 3 manufacturers that come out with generics. That's different than biologics and biosimilars. Here, you really need to be about a $1 billion drug to get any attention in the biosimilar space. So all these drugs are multi-billion-dollar drugs. That was a 12, there's 13 and 14, so this is number 13 drug, a drug name that you've all heard of before, Humira. Number one selling drug of all time in the history of pharmaceuticals, sells about $25 to $30 billion a year. Went biosimilar about a year ago, 1/1/2023. And we look at this slide, you notice a couple things. Number one, the drug Humira itself, branded product, costs about $90,000 per year. That's a WAC price, so just about $90,000. Then you go down that column, you see lots of different numbers. You see numbers down in the $15,000 range, and then some in the $85,000 range. And you also notice that some of these drugs have two prices. So one drug with two different prices. So the way it's been launched is that these manufacturers come out with a drug and then they come out with an unbranded product as well. And why would they do that? Well, in our crazy United States world, there's rebate drugs and there's non-rebate drugs. So for example, like a Hadlima comes out with Hadlima brand name and then Hadlima unbranded. So you have a high cost, high WAC drug for formularies that are still dependent, and payers and employer groups that are still dependent on rebates, which most of us still are. And then you have the lower price product for more lean formularies that aren't dependent on rebates. So it's been a unique market the way that all these Humira products have been launched. You see a couple interchangeables on here. This is actually only half of them, because this is the original concentration Humira. When I go to the next slide, this is a similar list of the high concentration Humira, and this is about 85% of the market share. On this slide, only one of the products, but most of the way down the page, Simlandi, just received interchangeability. As I get deeper into this talk, I'll talk about interchangeability and whether that really means anything or not. So that's Humira. And then the last of the 14 biosimilars that are approved in the United States, this one's Stelara. Hasn't actually been launched yet, but the top one, Wezlana, was just approved recently. It was approved as an interchangeable. Stelara is actually a pretty big drug. I mentioned Humira is about 25 to 30 million a year. Stelara is about 25 to 30 billion dollars per year. Stelara is about 18 billion. It's a big drug. And to put that in perspective, Lipitor back in the day sold about 15 billion. So Stelara is a bigger drug than Lipitor ever was. In the question right now, this is going to be launched at the beginning of 2025. And what payers, PBMs, et cetera, they're thinking about is, what's the game plan for this very large biosimilar launch? Will it take the same game plan and have multiple products? It looks like it's going to. We're going to have 7 or 8 products. And how will the pricing come out? So a year ago, we didn't know what this first year of Humira was going to look like. And Amgen launched Amgevita at a 55% discount. And we were all like, wow, that's a pretty big discount. It was actually surprised me it was so deep. But in general, since then, all the other products for Humira have come out even deeper. So we'll see if the game plan for Amgen's Wezlana, maybe they come out even deeper. Maybe they come right out of the blocks at like a 70 or 80% discount. So that's the drugs that have launched so far. 14 molecules have launched, or almost launched. Stelar's not quite launched yet. The next point is when we have all these biosimilars out there, have we saved any money? Back in about 10 years ago or so, 2009 through 2014, there was this period of time called the traditional pharmaceutical patent cliff. A lot of big drugs were coming off patent. There was all this money to be saved. Lipitor, Crestor, Zoloft, et cetera. And when these drugs launched, within 30 to 90 days, their market share went from 100% down to 10%, very quickly. And it was very easily measurable. The PBMs could give you a report and say, 4 months ago you spent this much on Lipitor, and now look at this. We're all so great. We saved all this money in 90 days on the generic. We should be able to do that on the biosimilars now, right? It's not quite that easy, and I'm going to show you why. The first example is a drug called Remicade. Happens to be a medical benefit drug, but it serves a purpose for this example. You see this erosion curve here? It really doesn't look all that impressive. We're about 5-6 years in, and it's only about a 50% erosion curve. So 50% of the Remicade right now is biosimilar, 50% still brand name by J&J. So you're thinking, well, we're probably not saving that much money, but you really are. It's just hidden. It's not like generics where you could prove it so easily. Back in about 5 or 6 years ago, at peak price, Remicade cost about $77 per billing unit. Right now, no matter what you dispense to the patient, whatever the patient gets administered, it's about $25. So whether or not you're getting brand name Remicade or biosimilar Remicade, you're still only paying about $25 per billing unit. That's about a 70% decline, no matter if you're getting the brand or the biosimilar. So although the erosion curve looks a little anemic, doesn't look that great, you're actually saving quite a bit of money. The real great example of this same type theory, my theory, is that Humira. We talked about it, $25, $30 billion drug, launched a year ago. Everybody's talking about it, but you know how much really biosimilar we've converted? About 2%. So 98% of the biosimilar is still in brand name Humira by AbbVie. So you're thinking, well, we probably didn't save too much money, but you really did. Humira brand name, we talked about it, about $90,000 per year. A year and a half ago, pre-biosimilar, AbbVie was giving you about a 30% rebate, so that brought the $90,000 to about $63,000. So a year and a half ago, you're paying $63,000 for Humira. Now, we're in a year plus, a biosimilar, only 2% has switched, but AbbVie's now giving everybody a 60-70% rebate, bringing that $63,000 down to $36,000. So you're saving 50% on all that Humira. You're dispensing the same drug, everybody's still getting brand name Humira, but you're paying 50% less. It's harder to get your PBMs to report those numbers because it's all mixed in the rebates, but you are saving that money. So when you see these bad news about no erosion on Humira, you're still saving a lot of money. Why is that? Well, let's take you back to high school physics class. There was something called Newton's law. An object in motion will stay in motion unless impacted by an external force. If not, it just keeps going straight. The problem with Humira so far is there's been no external forces to change that path toward biosimilar. Let's take you through a few of these reasons why. In management of biosimilars, you can do 3 things. On the far left, you can stay brand only. On the far right, you can go biosimilars all in. But about a year ago, we said that most people wouldn't do either of those. They'd stay in the middle, put biosimilars in parity with Humira, and everybody was going to be happy. And that's exactly what happened. Nobody did the far left. Nobody stayed with Humira only. And only one company switched Humira to a biosimilar, and that was Kaiser. Kaiser went to Amgen, switched all their patients. Of that 2% in the United States, a lot of that's probably Kaiser. Everybody else, 98% of the people out there, are still on branded Humira, and they're in the middle there with parity, with biosimilars on formulary and Humira on formulary, but no external force to change it. The benefit's the same, the cost share is the same, there's no pressure on docs, so people aren't changing. There's no external force. Here's a list of reasons, other reasons why we're not seeing movement towards biosimilar. Clinical confidence. We've had generics out there for about 30, 40 years. Doctors know when they substitute atorvastatin for Lipitor, you're getting the same result. And they've had 30, 40 years to prove it, and there's been really no adverse effects. Everybody's getting the clinical results. With biosimilars, we're starting to build up that confidence, but I don't think we're quite there. The diseases treated by these biosimilars are also a lot more complex. They're on a $100,000 drug, and the doc's like, do you really want to take the chance and switch somebody on a $100,000 drug when the patient's not going to save anything, they're on the same formulary tier, so the doctors aren't doing anything? Another reason why the erosion isn't happening. Payers themselves. I used to be one. I worked at a health plan for many years. The PBMs that you guys all work with, they're sitting around the table making formulary decisions, and they're saying, should we go biosimilars all in? Even there, the confidence in it starting to grow. We haven't really had anybody not had clinical results. We haven't had any bad side effects, but the clinical confidence isn't quite there yet. Starts versus switches. These patients on these biologics are pretty complex diseases. And I think as a specialist, if you're a rheumatologist or a dermatologist, et cetera, gastroenterologist, you wouldn't mind going biosimilar on a new start, but to make a switch, somebody's been stable on a product for so long, it's a little bit more of a risk. So again, they don't want to switch somebody, but maybe they'll start them on a new start, but new starts don't quite happen as much as it would be easy to switch everybody from existing drug to new drug. So another reason why you're not seeing conversion. Payer policies. Lipitor, Crestor, nobody really had prior auth on those. Everybody has prior auth on these $100,000 drugs. So they got a piece of paper that says, I can take my Humira for a year. So a lot of payers aren't bucking those documents they've already given to the patients. And so the erosion curve, even due to policies that the payers are affecting erosion. Another reason why there's not converting is these products, these biosimilars, have to be sold. Generics, pharmacy buys the generics, the pharmacist gets the Lipitor script, he switches it to atorvastatin, that's it. With the biologics, the biologic company has to go out, get a sales force, market it to health plans, sell it to the PBMs, go into the doctor's office and convince them that their product's better than it's a lot more complex. There's a lot of reasons why you're not seeing this biosimilar conversion that you did with generics. Generics happened overnight. The tail on biosimilar conversion is just a lot longer. I have a whole other page, but I think you're starting to get the point. So the savings is there. It's just harder to report on. And the switches are a lot harder to do. So we've talked about the drugs themselves. We've talked about cost. We've talked about the erosion. Let's get into another difficult topic, interchangeables. Are these really important or not? And I think I'll just go ahead and tell you, it's unclear whether the designation really is important or not, and I'll go through a few data points on that. First of all, in the United States today, there's 8 products that have the interchangeable designation. So we have 14 products, 14 molecules that are biosimilar. Of those 14 molecules, there's 48 drugs approved. Of the 48, only these 8 have the interchangeable designation. That's not very many. The FDA has not made it easy, and the manufacturers have to spend a lot of money to do studies, or at least for a long time now. Now they're starting to do it without studies, but the FDA has not made it easy to get this interchangeable designation. And I think they're starting to change their tune. First of all, what is a biosimilar compared to a regular molecule? So a biosimilar is a living organism. You can't quite make an exact copy. It's a living organism. With traditional drugs, they're chemical compounds. You can make the exact copy. Maybe the binder's a little different, but the drug itself is an exact copy. So biosimilar is similar, it's not the same. What the FDA thought is, because of that, let's make it a little harder to get that interchangeability. In the United States, we're the only country in the world that has this interchangeable designation. Europe, China, Japan, Mexico, Canada, they all have biosimilars, but they don't have the separate designation, only the United States. And I think the FDA is starting to see maybe they made a mistake. So let's take a look at that a little more. Is the interchangeable designation worth it? Is it worth it to spend the money and do studies and try to get the interchangeability? Is the designation actually selling more of that product compared to one that doesn't have the designation? Well, let's take a look. The first example is Humira. There's 13 or so products out there, and there's 3 companies now, only 3, that have made the decision to switch everybody. I mentioned Kaiser. They chose Amjevita. They switched 100% of their patients. And Amjevita, by the way, does not have the interchangeable designation, okay? CVS recently came out and said, coming up here this spring, we'll make the move. We're gonna switch to Hyrimoz by Sandoz. Hyrimoz doesn't have the designation either. Okay, two out of 2. The third one, the VA, just made the switch. They're gonna do it sometime in 2024. They're gonna switch everybody on the VA system to Hadlima by Samsung Bioepis Organon. Hadlima doesn't have the designation either. So what you see there is even the companies that are switching everybody haven't chose the interchangeable products. Okay, so from that angle, doesn't look so important. I found a different data point. If you look at Lucentis has 2 biosimilars. Cimerli, Bioviz, I think I pronounced that right. Cimerli got the interchangeability designation right off the bat, quite a bit before Bioviz. And when ophthalmologists have to choose which drug to inject into the eye, they've been choosing the interchangeable 35% of the time. They've only chose Bioviz 6% of the time. So from that angle, looks like ophthalmologists think the interchangeability designation is important. So I think the real answer is it's unclear yet. We don't know if interchangeability is important. We think right now the FDA is changing their tune a little bit as well. The example of that is when you open up a package insert, you get a bottle of whatever it is, and you open up the biosimilar label. On the top, if it's biosimilar, it says, this product is biosimilar to ABC drug. If it's interchangeable, it says, this product is a biosimilar interchangeable to this drug, right on the label. They came out, they're gonna take that interchangeable designation out. Now all biosimilars would just say, this drug is interchangeable to this drug, and take out that notation of interchangeability, de-emphasizing the importance of interchangeability. So I think this story is yet to be told, but it's an interesting one and creates a lot of discussion. And lastly here is the biosimilar pipeline. So we talked about 14 molecules with biosimilarity, launched biosimilars to date. There's about 25 more in the next 10 years coming. 2024 to 2026, 10 new molecules, 27 to 29, 8, and 2030 to 2033, 7 molecules. So 25 new ones in the next 10 years. So we have 14 today, 25 more in the next 10 years. If each one of those molecules gets launched by 4 companies, it would be 100 new biosimilars to deal with. So there's going to be you're going to be hearing about biosimilars for years to come. So we have these 25 new molecules coming. Which drugs and which therapy areas will we be saving money? Inflammatory disease. If you look on your top drug category spends, inflammatory disease is near the top with oncology. And this is the primary area we're going to see a lot of savings. So Humira is in this category. You're going to see more savings in this area. Big names, Stelara we mentioned, Dupixent, Enbrel, Cosentyx, Entyvio, all big drugs, multi-billion-dollar drugs. You're going to see a lot of activity in inflammatory disease. A couple other areas, MS and oncology. Drug you see on TV advertisements quite a bit, Keytruda. One of the top selling drugs in the world right now will be going biosimilar in 2029. It's the one I highlighted. And then areas like diabetes, asthma, and a few other areas also have drugs coming. And today, really, you can't talk about pharmaceuticals if you don't mention the GLP-1s, right? So I'll just talk about GLP-1s for a second. Trulicity, a big GLP-1 made by Eli Lilly, same company that makes Mounjaro. Trulicity sells about $16 billion right now. It's going to be going biosimilar in 2027. And you guys are starting to think, okay, you told me about Trulicity, but how about the drugs we're really talking about, Ozempic and Mounjaro? This is really an interesting fact, and I had to look it up twice myself. Trulicity is a biologic. Strangely enough, the way the Ozempic molecule and Mounjaro molecule were made and were evaluated by the FDA, they're not biologics, they're traditional pharmaceuticals, so they won't be biosimilars, they'll actually be generics. So when you get to 2031 with Ozempic, Mounjaro 2036, maybe that erosion curve will go really quick in that 30 to 90 days like we talked about with those other drugs. So that's what's coming up with biosimilars over the next 10 years. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Julie, and she's going to take you through the IRA and impacts to employer groups.
Thanks, Jeff. And you're all probably wondering why we're talking about the IRA, because after all, isn't that a Medicare law? So as it turns out, it is a Medicare law, but it's mostly Medicare, but it has some really significant direct as well as indirect impacts to commercial business as well. So we're just going to go through a few of those points. In keeping with the biosimilar theme for today, we'll talk about some updates to biosimilar reimbursement that were integrated as part of the IRA, some accelerated or the potential for accelerated biosimilar launch timelines as the result of the IRA. And then we'll deviate from the biosimilar theme a bit and talk about drug price negotiation, inflation rebates, Medicare Part D benefits, and impact to pharmacy networks. So we'll start off with the topic of increased biosimilar reimbursement. And when we talk about this, we're referring to Medicare Part B drugs, which is akin to medically covered biosimilars, so drugs that are covered under the medical benefit. Not so much the Humiras, but more along the lines of the Remicade biosimilars, Avastin biosimilars, that group that are provider administered. So the IRA implemented a temporary provision, 5 years, that started in 2022 that changes the way that biosimilars are reimbursed. Initially, prior to October of 22, biosimilars were reimbursed at average sales price, or ASP, plus an add-on fee of 6%. That 6% was a percentage of the original brand, not the biosimilar. That was done to ensure that that add-on payment was the same to the provider, regardless of whether the provider chose to administer the brand name product or the biosimilar. So the provider was neither incentivized or de-incentivized to use the biosimilar. The IRA changed the reimbursement for the biosimilar to ASP plus 8%. So now we're actually incentivizing providers to use the biosimilar by giving them an extra 2% in that add-on payment to count towards their reimbursement. Now, to qualify for this, the biosimilar's average sales price does have to be lower than the brand name product's ASP. And in most cases, that is the case for biosimilars. And again, this directly impacts Medicare Part B reimbursement, but many payers use the same or similar fee schedule for reimbursement on the commercial side. So we're likely to see this incentivized biosimilar reimbursement policy coming through on commercial payer reimbursement and fee schedules as well. Something to keep in mind there. Drug price negotiation is next. Okay, I'm sure this is something that you've all heard talked about in the media. CMS right now is in the process of negotiating the price of 10 Part D eligible medications with their manufacturers. Those 10 medications were selected because they're high expenditure drugs on the Part D benefit. They're single source drugs, so no biosimilar or generic competition at this time. And they've been on the market at least 9 years if they're a small molecule, or 13 years if they're a biologic or large molecule. Now, the goal of this negotiation process is to arrive at a number that we refer to as the maximum fair price, or MFP. This is a number that you should remember because it will be a new price point for consideration and negotiation down the road as we talk about commercial benefits. So the goal of this MFP is to allow manufacturers to continue to make some profit, but to set a fixed amount that will represent the maximum that CMS will pay for those medications. So again, this creates a new price point. I like to think about it if we were in a card game and CMS was on one side of the table and commercial payers were at the table and the manufacturer was at the table. This is a little bit like maybe the manufacturer tipping their cards a bit towards the commercial payers, because we'll know what those MFP values are. Those will be public as of, for the first group of 10 drugs, they'll be public on September 1st. So we'll know exactly what that amount is that the manufacturers have agreed to pay to CMS. So again, just a bit of commercial leverage there in terms of negotiating rebates and prices in that book of business. The other issue that gets a little bit swallowed up when we talk about MFPs, there's a lot of focus on what the price is. But when a drug is selected for MFP negotiation, when that MFP is decided, there's a requirement that those drugs are covered on all Medicare formularies. So I'm not sure how much you all know about Medicare formulary development, but payers are not required to cover every single drug on the Medicare Part D benefit. They can pick and choose, just like on the commercial side, which drugs they want to cover in which categories and classes. If a drug is selected and it has an MFP, it has to be covered on every single Medicare formulary in the country. It's a bit like unlocking the keys to the kingdom. Now, this is a good thing, generally. If that MFP is at a place where the manufacturer is continuing to make a pretty significant profit, and now we've opened up all the formularies across the country to that drug, that would increase access. That puts that manufacturer in a pretty favorable position, right? So that could carry over in the form of maybe even increased rebates in the commercial book. At a minimum, I would expect that in that scenario, commercial rebates wouldn't change, but maybe it's enough of an advantage that they'll look at providing additional rebates in the commercial book in an effort to get favorable formulary position in that way. Now, the converse is also true as well. If that MFP is at a place where the manufacturer believes that they're barely making any profit, and maybe they've already got pretty broad formulary coverage, then suddenly that manufacturer is in a position that they're going to have to make up some dollars on the commercial book of business. So you may see in those scenarios rebate offers going down and manufacturers kind of making an effort to recoup dollars in the commercial book that they're potentially losing on the Medicare side. That it will have an impact on the commercial book of business. What that specific impact is will depend on the manufacturer and the specific drug in question. So stay tuned. Okay, so potential for accelerated launch timelines in biosimilars. This is a very indirect impact to both Medicare as well as commercial books of business. I mentioned earlier that in order to be selected for negotiation for an MFP, a drug has to be single source, so no generic and no biosimilar competition available. So Jeff did a very nice job of covering the fact that we've had relatively slow erosion of brand products in the biosimilar market. So biosimilar uptake has not been as quick as generic uptake typically is, and it sometimes takes a number of years for a biosimilar to really get a very good foothold in a market. So if you're a brand manufacturer with a biologic product that's about to be selected for negotiation with CMS, and you're looking at taking a 35, 45, 60% cut off of your list price in order to get to that MFP, you might decide there's a biosimilar that might come out, might get 1 or 2% of the market share. Maybe it's worth it for me to consider allowing that biosimilar to come to market in order to not be selected for negotiation with CMS. So it puts brand manufacturers kind of in a position of entertaining the opportunity for a biosimilar to come to market so that they have competition and they get knocked out of that eligibility for CMS negotiation. As long as the launch occurs prior to the MFP agreement being finalized, that brand price is spared. Now, what I mean by that is that the brand manufacturer can continue to price that medication however they want, and MFP never goes into place. So this obviously is an advantage for the brand manufacturer, but it's also an advantage for the biosimilar manufacturer. When you consider biosimilars typically launch at a price that's 10, 20, 30% below the price of the brand product, that 10 to 30% below WAC, or wholesale acquisition cost, is going to be higher than 10, 20, or 30% below MFP. Because as the pricing, kind of spectrum goes, AWP is kind of the highest, WAC is a discount off of AWP, MFP will be a price point that's lower even than WAC. So biosimilars have a definite stake in this in terms of not wanting that brand to be selected for negotiation so that an MFP doesn't go into place before they can launch. There's even a provision within the IRA that allows a biosimilar manufacturer to petition CMS to delay the selection of the brand name product for up to 2 years if they believe that their biosimilar can launch within that 2-year time frame and provide that competition. So there are a lot of different entities that have a stake kind of in this MFP negotiation piece, including biosimilar manufacturers. So what this could lead to is earlier settlement agreements. For some of these cases that have been tied up in litigation for years, we might see brand manufacturers just decide, okay, we're going to settle and we're going to let that biosimilar come to market a year or two earlier than it otherwise would have, just so that we can avoid selection under the IRA for negotiation. Okay, inflation rebates is a little bit more straightforward. This is something that has been in place on the Medicaid book of business for a number of years. Now the IRA puts it in place for Medicare books of business. So this looks at all drugs basically covered under Medicare and compares their rate of inflation to the overall rate of inflation, the CPIU. If the rate of inflation of the drug is higher than the rate of general inflation, then a rebate is owed back to CMS. In order to avoid inflation rebates, manufacturers will slow the rate of growth of their drug prices. When the rate of growth of drug prices slows, Medicare benefits, of course, but commercial payers also benefit because, of course, that rate of growth is slowed. So that's great, except that we're hypothesizing, since manufacturers will be held to a slower rate of growth, that probably means that they're going to launch drugs, new drugs, at a higher price point than they otherwise would have when they had more flexibility in terms of how fast they could raise prices on those products. Okay, enhanced Medicare Part D benefits. There are a lot of changes happening with Med D benefits. The chart that you see on the screen is a comparison of benefits in 2024 to benefits in 2025 and how much each of the contributors contributes in each of the benefit phases. It's kind of a complicated slide. What I really want to draw your attention to is the red line that represents the out-of-pocket spending cap. So this is how much beneficiaries are responsible to pay out of pocket from year to year. In 2024, that amount is $3,250. That's lower even than it was in 2023. Moving into 2025, that's dropping down to $2,000, again, which is even lower than what it is this year. This will result in Medicare beneficiaries hitting catastrophic coverage. Catastrophic coverage is represented by everything over the red line much more quickly, and there will be a lot more beneficiaries that hit that level of coverage. So that becomes important if you're a contributor to that catastrophic phase. Now, in 2024, if you look at the light blue fields on the diagram, in 2024, Part D plans, which are the light blue, contributed 20% during that catastrophic phase. In 2025, that's increasing to 60%. So that's a tripling of the responsibility for Part D plans. Now, granted, there's a reinsurance process during this phase that results in CMS giving a direct subsidy back to Part D plans for some of that amount that they're paid. But there are changes in the calculation of that subsidy as well that are so these are all factors that are kind of serving to create uncertainty in what really Part D plans are going to be responsible for in that catastrophic phase. In addition, if you look at the green fields, which are drug manufacturer contributions, in 2024 and previous, drug manufacturers never had any responsibility in the catastrophic phase. In 25, they're going to have a 20% responsibility. Now, previously they had a 70% contribution in the donut hole or in the coverage gap phase, but that's a defined contribution period. So manufacturers knew exactly when the donut hole would stop at a certain level of out-of-pocket expenditure of the beneficiary. In the catastrophic phase, there's really no maximum. There's no limit to that. So that's creating some uncertainty on the part of manufacturers regarding how much they're actually going to have to contribute to these patients when they're in the catastrophic phase. So you've got payers with a level of uncertainty here related to changes in the Part D benefits. You've got manufacturers with a lot of uncertainties related to their Part D benefits. And so that is kind of just serving to destabilize the confidence that payers and manufacturers have in their profitability in Medicare Part D. That will create some pressures that will spill over into the commercial book that will probably look like potentially lower rebates in certain instances, and then higher premiums and higher out-of-pocket costs related to payer responsibilities. Finally, I wanted to talk about pharmacy network impact for just a minute. Because this is something that I haven't seen discussed a whole lot in the media, but it is something worth considering, and it's a concern that we've heard from some of our subscribers at IPD. So typically, pharmacy networks are reimbursed for brand name products at a rate of AWP minus a percentage plus a dispensing fee. As that AWP goes up, reimbursement increases. As AWP goes down, reimbursement decreases. The IRA introduces a new payment formula for retail pharmacies for drugs that have an MFP. Now, granted, it's only 10 drugs starting in 26, but each year there's an accumulation of drugs with 10, 15, or 20 added on every year after that. So over years, there are going to be a lot of drugs that have this MFP value associated. Remember, MFP in the spectrum of drug payments or drug costs, AWP is the highest, WAC is lower, MFP is lower than that. So on these drugs that have an MFP, reimbursement to pharmacies is going to be significantly lower. Couple that with other regulatory changes that are happening in this market that have led to price decreases. In fact, I'll just share with you, since we have time, from December of 23 to January of 24, there were 20 single source medications that had significant price decreases on AWP and WAC prices. That's compared to the previous year, same time frame, there were 2. So that's because of some changes in Medicaid rebates that are happening and manufacturers taking a hard look at what their list prices are and what they want them to be. So there are a lot of factors here impacting retail pharmacy reimbursements with this downward pricing pressure that will result in retail networks looking at ways to keep themselves whole that will probably look like higher dispensing fees and potentially decreasing network discounts across lines of business, including commercial. So just to summarize here quickly, manufacturers are facing a number of headwinds as a result of Medicare Part D benefits. That looks like increasing contributions, particularly in that catastrophic phase that we just talked about. The requirement to pay inflation rebates in the Medicare book of business where they've never had that requirement before. And then, of course, drug price negotiation, where certain manufacturers are looking at taking a substantial hit on the profitability of their individual medications that are contracted by CMS. Medicare payers are also facing a number of headwinds. Those include increasing contributions, again, in the catastrophic phase in particular, lower out-of-pocket caps. Potentially, this is going to lead to higher premiums, higher out-of-pocket costs in the commercial business, and then looking at lower rebates on the commercial side as well because of some of the factors that we talked about. So potential commercial impact, looking at higher drug launch prices, potentially lower rebates. The one good thing may be faster, accelerated introduction of biosimilars to the market. We'll see how that plays out. And then finally, changing formularies in the commercial space too. As a result of changing rebate agreements and other factors kind of at play here, we'll probably see some changes to commercial formularies as the result of all of these IRA changes that are happening at the same time. With that, I think we're ready for questions a couple minutes early.
Hey, thank you so much for your amazing presentation. My question is mostly towards Jeff. So with the hesitancy in adopting biosimilars and the introduction of these bio-better products, do you think that this is the direction we're heading? And since these products are marketed as more efficacious than the biologic product, do you think that we'll see more uptake in these products compared to what we've seen in the biosimilar space?
Sure, thanks for the question. I think the question was bio-betters, and will we start to see more bio-betters rather than biosimilars? And will these biosimilars kind of take some of that market share from that therapeutic area? So first, what is a bio-better? Biosimilars are like generics, pretty much replicas of the originator drug. Bio-betters take that molecule and improve it just a little bit. Makes a little bit of a difference. I'm trying to remember one. I think Neupogen has one, or Neulasta has a bio-better that recently launched. I guess my answer will be potentially yes. We don't really know yet. I don't know if there's really been a bio-better that's been super successful yet. Can you think of any?
No.
No. So I think the answer will be potentially, but we haven't really seen a super successful bio-better yet. Bio-better really isn't like a official name. It's kind of been given to these biologics where they reformulate them a little. It's kind of like 505(b)(2)s when they make a, Procardia and then Procardia XL. It's a little bit better. Sometimes you can sell these and sometimes you can't. So I think the answer is yet to be seen.
All right, I think this is for Julie. Just a technical question. In calculating the inflation rebate, when we're measuring the rate of growth of the drug to compare to regular inflation, are prices in the commercial market taken into account, or how do we calculate that rate of growth for the drug?
For the drug, it's based on something called AMP, or average manufacturer price. So that is a value that's set, reported by manufacturers based on what they sell their drug to distributors for. So in the small molecule, regular retail kind of market, that's what a manufacturer sells to wholesalers for, essentially.
Okay.
So yeah, it's AMP. So we've got WAC, AWP, AMP, NADAC-G, ASP. There are lots of alphabet soup of drug prices, but that in particular is based on AMP.
Thank you.
Hey, Jeff. Kevin here. So with your Kaiser study, with the excluding the Humira for a biosimilar, did you run into any conversion rates for those people, any people that stayed on Humira because of medical necessity? And then asking you to pull out a crystal ball here with, some of our major PBMs, some of them kept them on parity, some of them are excluding. What do you predict the differences in conversion rates for those PBMs when looking at the choices and how they're going to treat biosimilars?
I like predicting because you can't be wrong, right? So the question is, Kaiser did it a year ago, and how successful were they? I think they were pretty darn successful. Kaiser's unique in their way they manage. They own their docs. Their docs are motivated, and I don't know exactly how, but they get changes made. So, but I think what I heard is pretty successful, 9 out of 10 probably. So I think they've been pretty successful in their conversions. They usually are. For others, so if you go outside of that Kaiser model, how successful will the conversions be? Less than that. So, when somebody like CVS comes out and says they're going to do it, you got to kind of understand what they're trying to say. They're saying this is for the plans that adopt this policy, we're going to do it. So it's not going to be all their membership. It's for the membership that's under, whatever formulary they choose and what that adoption will be. And for these commercial lines, in like a Lipitor conversion or all these other generic conversions, or even in a formulary conversion, if you can get, 70, 80%, I would say initially, if you can get 60% conversion over the first year or so, that would be a home run. But yet to be seen. We haven't really seen a lot at 2% right now. We just don't know.